you don't learn from the lessons of the past, you will suffer. Well, we didn't want to put any of our own, certainly in terms of the thematic material, we didn't want to put any of our own baggage. I mean, we had no interest in putting our messages into this movie, but we thought that we should honor Tolkien by putting his messages into it.
Tyrannous reformation of the earth, our place. That is really why he hated machines. Of course, it's perfectly true. He hated the internal combustion engine for perfectly good practical reasons. I mean, noise, congestion, destruction of cities, and many people greatly agree with him now. Into a secondary world that may not be very much more pleasant, but is at any rate very different. And there are terrors as well as beauties in the secondary world. And why should what he offered, if it is escape, not be the escape of the prisoner, which in other contexts is regarded as a very noble thing to try to do, to get away?
There is no such thing as a natural death. Nothing that happens to man is ever natural, since his presence calls the whole world into question. All men must die, but for every man his death is an accident, and even if he knows it, he consents to it, an unjustifiable violation.
The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whether then I cannot say.
Sweet, we're all here. I think. Oh, wait.
Yes.
Where'd Cadfly go? Oh, shit.
Man, is this your first time hosting, Dane?
Technically, can I turn on his camera on him? I think maybe he just hung a curtain over it then. It's kind of like the Palantir.
It should be on, if you can hear me.
We can hear you. I just can't see you.
So the your camera screen is black. That is weird. Mine is intentional because my really terrible internet here at the hotel that I'm staying at for work. So that's why Dane is hosting with the highest of Canadian internet speeds.
It's pretty high.
So if the stream cuts out for any reason, it's Dane's fault.
Yeah.
Well, now we know why he's all dressed up, though.
That is true.
You do. I just like looking good, man. But we can't all be naturals like you.
Right. T-shirt.
Well, I mean, look at that pipe. That's a +5 to charisma pipe.
Well, I'm technically hosting. I'm not really hosting. So I don't know. Pips, do you want to do your own script? And then I'm on chat highlighting duty today because that's what I can do.
All right. So yeah, we're here today with the normal cast. We got Gadfly Fiction back, who I think I heard him and his camera's having issues. Is that correct?
Seems to be.
Okay. It might be if you want to hop out and then rejoin. Oftentimes that fixes it. If you just want to just close the browser that you're on, try to rejoin back in, have Dane bring you back in. Sometimes that fixes the issue.
All right.
But while he's doing that, I guess Dane, we already see him, looking good up there. Fitzy is asleep on the floor next to the dog bed because that's how Fitzy rolls, right?
He's such a jerk when it comes to that. Like, I got him this new one, and I was like, all right, finally a good pet owner. Buy him some nice swag. First freaking day there, he just basically deliberately lies next to it the whole fucking day. Can't believe him.
Perfect.
Anyways.
I guess we'll go with you, Nate, next. You got something different in the pipe this week, right? Oh, there he is.
I do. It's a blend from the Country Squire down in Mississippi. They've got a series of like 6 or 7 blends that they base off of the Lord of the Rings series, and I'm having their Scottish blend bag end this morning or afternoon, whatever the hell it is. And it's
Very
mighty
nice.
good.
Is it how does it compare with the Cavendish that you normally do?
Well, I don't have the Cavendish. That's the Capstone.
Kaplan, sorry, the Capstone. Yeah. How does it compare with your normal?
Capstan is a Virginia. It's a blend. It's one of my favorite blends. So it's not there. This adds just a bit of Latakia and a little bit more oomph behind the smokiness, and it just does just fine for me today.
Well, when all of us get together and crash next year's Jordan Con or something like that, which I think like the 5 of us showing up together would actually like triple the attendance of Jordan Con. So I think that we could pretty easily take it over. We'll have to I'll have to bring my pipe and we'll have a good time, I think.
There we go.
Gadfly, how are you today?
Not too bad. Not too bad. My students just took their first test for the term, 1 of 4. Most did pretty well. Out of the 1,230 of them, we only had 40 people not take the test, which is a pretty good percentage.
Wait, people don't take the test?
Yeah, well, it's a purely online test, so people just forget. They do have 2 days to do it, though. 2 days to do a 35-minute test.
They might have your internet pips. Don't judge.
Terrible. Okay. All right.
So dealing with all the fallout of that has been kind of fun.
And you got your office to yourself today? I know you said that you might have to be in a different place.
No, actually, someone was using my office this morning. There's like 5 of us who share one office that has enough space for 2 people. So
now wait a second. I thought that academia was just burning money to build new buildings and climbing walls and lazy rivers and theme parks and sort of safe spaces and puppy cuddle rooms. Like where
I've got one of those.
You don't have an office?
Yeah, they are burning money to build stuff, and as they are burning money, it's not being productive in its use.
Yep.
So,
come by Ohio State campus, you'll see it.
Someone sounds jealous. Too bad you're in the classics department.
yeah.
So you mean to tell me that government is poorly allocating resources?
Well, in this case, it's not government because it's a private institution that is purely government funded.
So the misallocation of government resources is actually at the top, not kind of at the end.
It's a funny system altogether, but it is the reason why the universities here in Ontario love international students, because international students have to pay more than the universities get for a residential student.
Wait. Gadfly's Canadian?
Yeah.
How did I not know this?
That's
Other than the obvious that I was drunk when I heard it the last time.
Because I'm in Ontario, which is
About to say, is it French
middle
Quebec?
America.
All right. Well, as much as that's probably interesting to everyone, I don't know. Dane, go highlight.
Am I gonna? Yeah, that's what I was waiting for.
Jacob,
Right.
hey, how's it going?
Going down.
Oh, hey, LPK, you got to tell us in the chat if you're actually reading along with us or if you're just hanging out and making fun of us and posting sweet memes in the Discord. Just
Couldn't blame you for either.
Red's here. Lady Balefire is lurking around. I saw Sven. I think I saw Trip, which I think that she's awake before her. What's the opposite of bedtime for people?
Awake time.
Something like that. I don't know. She always complains that we do these streams at 1 p.m. and that's too early for her to get up on a weekend, apparently. Anyway, I don't know. You guys want to dive into this?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So, Return of the Ring or the Return of the King, book 5 starts with Minas Tirith, which is Gandalf, Pippin. They're hanging out there talking with Denethor. And Pippin ends up being like, "Here, take my sword," and do this whole thing. I think they got the lines of the oath that he swears pretty much dead on in the movie. So they definitely did some of it. But what are you guys' thoughts about this chapter?
They kind of get right into it. There's not a they don't really waste a bunch of time. They, get on a horse, take him to Gondor, talk to Denethor, swears his oath, and we're off to the races.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This would be 700 pages if it was a Wheel of Time book.
It picks up.
And that's just for the prologue.
So the story of Pippin in this book picks up immediately after it ends from book 2, right? Which is one of those things where you see it was actually written as one whole story rather than written into 3 different books initially. So it's picking up immediately after that it ends with Pippin and Gandalf riding hell for leather towards Gondor. And so you have the first chunk of it is the world development, going through all the different sites that they essentially pass by on the way to the White City, which is one of those bits that I always look at those passages in between events happening in Tolkien's works are always bits that are enjoyable to read. Like you get actual pleasure from just reading those words, even if there's not a lot happening in them.
I would agree with that. Like the description of the guards of the Citadel and Minas Tirith and like the white tree in the court and just stuff like that. The description that is going on around the characters is often really good. And like we talked about with Shelob, gives some really interesting insight into kind of the wider world. And if you've read the stuff about the wider world, is particularly interesting, right?
Yeah, I like how he describes activity that doesn't center around the protagonist's activity. They're riding straight for Gondor. They're stopping by, and Pippin looks up and they notice that the beacons have been lit. So it's not like in the movie where the action happens to be centered around every action of the protagonist. So the world almost in one sense stands kind of still, waiting for somebody to kick it into gear. Tolkien doesn't write that way. He's like, no, they're going to war. They're not. Denethor's not resting on his laurels, as it seems like what he is in the movie. He's asking for help. The beacons are lit. Everybody's going about their business, running around and doing their thing, and they, Gandalf and Pippin are a part of that activity, but life doesn't cease outside of theirs.
The world around the main characters is progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's progressing in a believable manner. It's not waiting for the main characters to come in and initiate all the actions and stuff. And and the little bit at the beginning with Ingold when they get to when they're getting into Gondor is always a little bit that makes me laugh as well. The dialogue between Ingold and Pippin. When Gandalf introduces Pippin. His name is Peregrine, a very valiant man. Man, said Ingold dubiously, and the others laughed. Man, cried Pippin, now thoroughly roused. Man? Indeed not. I am a hobbit, and no more valiant than I am a man, save perhaps now and again by necessity. Do not let Gandalf deceive you. But then Ingold's response as well is, many a doer of great deeds might say no more. But what is a hobbit, right? So that little interaction of valiant men doing what is necessity, but also this sort of mix of world building. The men of Gondor have no idea what a hobbit is. Just like the men of Rohan had no idea what a hobbit was.
Yeah. But the really funny thing is, at this point in the story, Pippin's got his fucking credibility like way up, right?
Yeah.
He helped the ring escape from like 9 dark riders and make it all the way to Rindel. He tried to cross Caradhras in the Misty Mountains, was turned back. He survived Moria, where even Gandalf couldn't even do that, right? Saw the Lady of the Wood, went all the way down, went out fighting, helping Boromir, although, we know how that ended up. Was taken prisoner, escaped, with his buddy Merry, roused the Ents, and took out Saruman. So Pippin's done more than this fucking guard has, right?
Yeah.
So there's some interesting stuff to that, and I think that's exactly what Tolkien's commentary there about the many a person would say much the same, right? But we kind of passed something that I wanted to bring up that I think Nate, you said this. The beacons were already lit when they arrived. And this, along with the characterization of the relationship between Denethor and Faramir, are probably two of the things that I am even more frustrated with the movies than kind of previously was. Like I've never really been a huge fan of that change, but going back and reading through it and seeing how much better of a character I think Denethor is in the book, it's even more frustrating for me. So what did you guys think of the perspective there with the kind of the readiness of Gondor, Denethor's character, the plans that he was kind of making, and then to Gadfly's point about the world being more real, kind of just in passing. Gondor is set up as sort of like a feudal state, which is interesting and like makes a lot of sense and is kind of cool to see in a later chapter when the reinforcements come to Minas Tirith, right? Whereas in the movie it was like the classic fantasy thing where there's absolutely nothing around this just massive city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's like when people think of Athens and Sparta, they think of the cities, right?
Yeah.
But they governed and controlled a large geographical region of ancient Greece, right? And so Minas Tirith is the same sort of thing, right? Like Minas Tirith is the sort of capital region of Gondor. It's really just your preeminent city in there, but it's obviously you need to have enough farmers to feed that massive city. So you need to have enough production of goods to supply that city. And that means you need all these different little groups of places all over the place. You need your mines, you need your mills, you need your farms, you need your orchards, everything. Am I frozen?
I mean,
Yes, you're frozen.
yeah, your image, yeah.
That's okay.
It's been like that since you've been on.
It's university
all good.
webcam.
We can still hear you.
It's a pretty good screenshot of you, so we weren't bringing it up. Like if
Yeah.
you were making a goofy face or something, we probably would have said something. But you look like a handsome man.
No,
It's
he
pretty
wouldn't.
good.
Yeah. You look like you could be a really good sort of Aomer.
That didn't fix it, but it's all good. But no, you're 100% right. In this version of the story, there's a whole bunch of stuff around Minas Tirith, and then as was often the case in these kinds of battles, okay, we need to get everybody inside of the walls to defend it. We have to, unfortunately, burn down the stuff like outside of the walls to, so we don't let the enemy hide right up against the walls. And then, it really sucks to suck if you get caught outside the walls, because unfortunately you're just dead at that point. But this is the sort of thing that the book thinks about and handles that the movies didn't. So it's a sort of a nice change, and I would argue it's an upgrade.
Yeah, I've never really contemplated that from the movies, but you're absolutely right. When you look at how they laid it out, like what Minas Tirith is, it's completely an impractical visual, notwithstanding that it's like a city on a mountain with 7 walls and whatnot. That's cool enough, but where does the food supply come from? Where is the rest of the civilization? There's a ruined city a little bit down, but I mean, they found a field in New Zealand to film big horse sequences on.
Yep.
But that's about it. That's not kind of how it would have looked. So yeah, I can appreciate this passage, I guess, in the books that is, in a way, it's more realistic, right? They're passing towns and farms and villages. There's watchtowers.
I mean, it's actually
people
called
around.
the Townland, right?
Yeah.
So the Pelennor and sort of the Townland, and it's got a wall with towers and things like around that, right? So very Gadfly, you brought up Athens, right? Wasn't that one of the things that kind of ancient Athens did, was built a I'm trying to remember which leader of Athens it was, but basically built a wall kind of around their whole sort of area, right?
Well, there was the Piraeus, where they built a wall stretching from the wall of Athens to the wall of their harbor, which was quite a ways away, and so it was a protected pathway.
And that's what that kind of made me think of, right? So you have the what are the name of it? The sort of ship docks on the Anduin, and then also the approach to Osgiliath and the Townlands are all walled on at least the eastern side, and even a smaller fortification to the west between Rohan, right? And so it just made me think of that, and it just reminded me again of Tolkien's very practical military experience, and his kind of deep knowledge of history, right? Like, he would never have tolerated writing a story where like there's this massive city populated by tens or hundreds of thousands of people, and there's like no farms and orchards and vineyards and towns and like other fortifications and things around it. So I really liked reading through it. It was a good reminder of just the depth of the world that is there. But I don't know that I necessarily have more to add to it, other than that I enjoyed reading it.
Yep. Yeah, that notion of those cities isolated from all context that springs up. You really know that the person who wrote those types of cities is somebody who's lived in a modern city their entire life and has no idea of the production of food. Is what's the saying? Farmers feed cities, right? You can't have a societal culture without farmers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
I
some
think
other stuff.
the good
Oh,
stories also include the fact that, you know, like at least the movies that you see include those little outposts of farms and all that kind of stuff, and that when there is an attack coming into the region, the responsibility then of the king or whomever was responsible for them would bring them into within the walls as a defense. You know,
Yeah.
so you would see the evacuation of lands to protect the people, because the realization is it's while the farms and mills and all that are important to the daily productivity of the country, in the end, the people who supply the work on those lands is what is necessary for the continuation of the productivity.
Yep.
Yeah,
How,
and I think that we see that really well again with the recalling of these sort of outlying towns and villages into. So the city is going to send women and children and the elderly away, right? And then the outlying people and the outlying garrisons are all recalled, and then they bring up sort of feudal vassals and stuff like that from Dol Amroth and like all sorts of other different places. Which again, paints the picture that the world is larger than just Minas Tirith, whereas the movie unfortunately really made Minas Tirith was kind of it, and they even had the conversation with, I think in the next chapter or one of the next chapters, about like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had some dwarves and elves show up to help? And Legolas is like, I kind of feel like they're getting pressed on their own borders like right now. And he kind of stared off into the distance while he was talking about that, which made me think again of his like non-nerfed vision. Like he was just watching his his cousins and siblings just shooting at orcs like 4,000 miles away.
They're pressed.
But
I just want to give the film one piece of credit. It's in this chapter. But be careful with your words, Master Peregrine. There's no time for hobbit pertness, Theoden, yada yada. And he's like, but he will speak most to you and question you much, since you can tell him of his son Boromir. He loved him greatly. Do not tell him more than you need. Leave quiet the matter of Frodo and his errand. And best not to talk about Aragorn either. I kind of like how this was a lot more succinct with Gandalf in the film, where he's like, don't talk to him about Boromir. Better don't mention Frodo in the ring either. And don't bring up Aragorn. You know what? Just keep your mouth shut.
It's funny that you say that. I have a real life kind of story. A coworker of mine who we'll say that he was a good dude, but not necessarily like a good officer, I guess. He would. Okay, the story is there was a meeting at kind of a higher headquarters thing that had to happen, and he was the only guy that was around from the whole department. And so our boss, comes and calls me up and is like, "Hey, I need you to go to this meeting." And I tell him like, "I'm flying tonight. I don't think I can make it to that." And he's like, "Oh shoot, I forgot." Okay, and then he goes and talks to this other guy, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to go to this meeting." And he's like, "Okay, is there anything you want me to bring up or whatever?" And he's like, no, just like take notes, and like whatever. And then he came back to him and was like, actually, you know what? If just go there and just tell him that no one's able to be there for the meeting or whatever. And then he like leaves, and then he comes back and he's like, it's better if we don't send anyone at all. And that's what I think of, exactly like you pointed out, where he was just like, all right, don't talk about this. Don't talk about it. Actually, you know what? If you could just leave the room and not be present.
Yep. And it's really clever sort of how that's handled in in contrast to the books, because this sort of runs into the next portion of this where they sit down and Denethor just basically starts asking Pippin a bunch of questions and is just completely ignoring Gandalf. And Gandalf's getting really salty about it. Like, I just kind of enjoyed that. It really showed how much of like a petty dick Denethor is. Like, he's in many ways both a sort of a strong ruler while also being a petty asshole, which I feel like a lot of rulers are in a way. But it just made me laugh. It was like, you know, you sit down with like the president of the United States and you spend the first half of the meeting talking to his driver.
Well, we could probably all relate to that in recent years.
Yes.
It goes to that,
in the before times, before the driver,
before the
knew
long
more about
ago,
the current state of yes.
It plays to that notion of
Canada's been there since 2015. Is there someone else I should be talking to? He's doing yoga poses. What the fuck is going on? Sorry.
Clown world.
But the authority of the individual, right? And the authority of the position of status. So Denethor has the position of Steward of Gondor, which is a great position of authority. Gandalf is an authority. And so it's this, Denethor and Gandalf are, at least in Denethor's mind, are having this clash over who has the most authority. Technically it's neither of them. But
I would argue that Gandalf does. I mean, Gandalf is, to quote the Blues Brothers, quite literally on a mission from God. But
yeah, his authority over Gondor,
not political authority. I get what you're saying.
But it comes up later on when
Gandalf ruled there before the breaking. Right? His authority supersedes Denethor's.
Yes.
But not wanting to jump too far ahead, but it plays up again in the interaction with Faramir.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
But also the little bit after that, when Gandalf and Pippin go to their chambers and underneath, Pippin notices that Gandalf is laughing at the whole situation of Pippin being stuck between these two individuals.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Which goes to show Gandalf's character as generally a kind-hearted individual, right?
Yeah.
And he even dislikes Pippin significantly less. Like, he seems less irritated with Pippin now than he did, especially at the beginning. Gandalf the White is a lot more patient.
Might be. What did you guys think of Baragond and Burgle?
Baragond. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I feel like it's the thing we've talked about before with the changing of the tone. So, Nate, what do you think? I feel like it's like, hey, existential dread. We're about to have the final showdown between good and evil, and then and now go talk to this 10-year-old boy.
Yeah. So with Baragond, he's one of those characters that I felt that they could have included in the movie, while understanding why they didn't. But if you took, you didn't have to have necessarily the battle last so long in the movie.
Disagree.
And you could have taken some.
Alex, I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about a movie, which means nudity and fighting, and they weren't showing us Arwen like that. So,
right. But Baragond, he basically just he increases the lore of Faramir, to a wonderful degree of the heart of the people aren't necessarily with Denethor, they're with Faramir, because Faramir is, and there was a part in what Baragon was saying about Faramir. He's not like the ultimate warrior guy, but while he is stout in battle, he is also of a sound mind that just engenders the joy of the people around him. And kind of getting the perspective of the people, I would have found very enjoyable if they had added that into the movie. A whole lot, actually.
One of the other things that I think often gets overlooked when people are dealing with the great battles of good versus evil, the existential dread, so on and so forth. When you zoom down onto the little picture, in the face of that, the impact and the importance of that greater conflict gets magnified, right? So spending time with Baragon, this sort of typical soldier guy, he's written like, to me, he's written like a fella who would have come out of the trenches of World War I, like so many of the soldiers are. Just like, all right, I would like to know where my next meal is coming from, if it's warm, and if I have a dry place to sleep. And then with the son, obviously, nothing brings about the importance of defeating evil more so than seeing children who would have to live in the face of that evil or suffer the consequences of that evil should evil succeed. So this passage, although the tone shifts drastically, it's that sort of reverse bathos, where bathos, you have some super tense situation and then some bizarre thing happens that throws the whole thing off. Like, what is it? Django Unchained, where they're at the end, there's the standoff and between Django and I forget the
Leonardo DiCaprio.
It's like
no,
John Candy.
Not the slave owner, the slave.
Oh yeah.
But then Miss whatever her name is comes in, and Django just shoots her out of nowhere, and she goes flying. So it's a super comical moment that breaks the tension. In this case, it's a super light moment that completely amplifies the tension for me, narratively speaking.
Yep. I also like the shit talking that got done here, because Burgo wanted to wrestle with Pippin.
Yeah.
I did like Pippin's stuff about how, like, I'm regarded as like an unusually large and strong hobbit, actually, and you're like
but I'm not likely to grow anymore except sideways.
Now, did you guys catch that Pippin's only 29 years old?
Yep.
Yeah.
That means he was 12 at Bilbo's birthday party at the start of this book. I don't know. I kind of thought that a bit odd. I thought that Merry and Pippin were the ones that were kind of Frodo's old friends, but this kind of seems to imply Pippin's probably a more recent acquaintance, just given the age gap, right?
They're his cousins.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Pippin especially, but is Merry on the Brandy book side, and then obviously Pippin on the Took side.
So that's actually, it's interesting when you say that, but also, so hobbits come of age at what, like 50 something?
33.
Right?
No, 33 was.
Okay, never mind. That's right. So Frodo came of age at Bilbo's birthday, not the 17 years later, right? Okay,
right,
so that
Frodo was older than Pippin is now.
Yeah, and that's
at the start.
I was trying to figure out whether or not they were all sort of like children together, But I think pointing out that, like, he would have been 33 when they were 12, and the age gap is a little strange, but like at the same time, I mean, I have cousins that are a lot younger than me that you get along fine with. I'm not sure that any of them would go to Mount Doom with me,
Yeah, but when you think about it, when you think about that, though,
Fortnite, but
But when you think about that and think about how Merry first witnessed Bilbo disappearing when the SBs were
He
coming
was
over
10
the
years
hill.
old.
So yeah, 10-year-old, and all of a sudden the conspiracy starts from the mind of a 10-year-old boy.
Yeah, wow. I really had a lot of trust in that kid. If anybody, Pippin had come, a freaking 10-year-old had come to me and said, "Yeah, I was walking down the way, and the local crackpot put on a ring and disappeared." I'd have been like, "No, he didn't. Go away."
That's good. Yeah. Man, is there anything else we want to talk about from this chapter, or do we want to move on? I think that it's important to say that the end of this chapter is the reinforcements arriving, right? So Pippin shows up at the gates with Burgle. He uses his password that he has from Denethor, right? And so they get to actually stand outside the gate as the captains of the various kind of outland regiments all come in.
Yeah.
And like all of them are way too small. And you're getting the narration essentially that like everyone everywhere is pressed themselves and is not able to send as large of a host as like the city was hoping for, you know?
Lady B brought up the point earlier of the fact that Merry and Pippin both voluntarily chose to swear themselves into service as sort of a thing. And just another little bizarre historical tidbit for y'all. You know, the notion of praying like this with your hands together, that comes from the medieval act of swearing in service, because you would place your hands together inside the hands of the person you were swearing your allegiance to and your service to. And so they would hold your hands like that. And so when you're praying like that, you're praying because your hands are in God's hands.
Interesting.
So that's not in the books, but just a neat little aside bit about, you know, the act of swearing service into somebody.
Interesting. I think we'll definitely have a chance to talk about Merry swearing a similar oath and about that in the next chapters. Did you guys have any thoughts on the reinforcements?
My boy Imrahil is always
Prince of Dol Amroth.
Yep.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just another one of those aspects of showing that the whole world is pressed by this evil, right?
Yeah.
The course you're hearing about the Haradrim in the south and the Corsair on the coast, and then also the threats to the north that are less well defined. But you're getting this sort of claustrophobic feel, and it's similar to Helm's Deep, where it's like it's just us. Nobody else can help us at this point in time. So we have to man up, essentially, and do the task.
Yeah. Okay, so the black cloud comes out of Mordor and sort of settles over Minas Tirith. The darkness kind of begins, right? There's Gandalf's comment about that there will be no dawn the next morning, right? And that's the end of this chapter. So a lot of good stuff coming up, or a lot of good stuff kind of happening, right? I don't know. I enjoyed this chapter for a lot of the reasons we talked about. You guys have anything we haven't already talked about, or we want to move on to the passing of the Great Company?
I think we can move on.
I think we're ready.
Cool. All right. The passing of the Great Company is, I mean, the short kind of summary of it, right, is basically Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and the Dunedain head through the paths of the dead, right? They do this first so there's the arrival of the Dunedain, who show up while they're basically on the march with Theoden, right? and then they go and they hang out at Helm's Deep for a while, and Aragorn kind of thinks through, what he has to do. There's some stuff that we can probably talk about there with the messages that the Dunedain bring. And then they make the decision that, hey, we have to go to the Paths of the Dead. And so they take off separately from Theoden and the rest of the riders and head through Dunhollow, and then up to the actual Path of the Dead. And they go through them on their way to the River Anduin, right? So they're trying to take a shortcut through the mountains, and hoping to find some, I don't know, allies against Sauron there, right? So that's the 5,000 foot overview.
Yep. So this one starts out with them basically being afraid, like they're worried that they're in the middle of getting ambushed.
Yeah.
The Dunedain and Elrond's sons ride up to him and they're just like, "Hey, good news, bad news. We're here now, but also your guys aren't going to make it in time, so we got to do something else." And then starts dropping the juicy tidbits about, but we have a plan. Hear me out. It's a bad plan, but we think we can do it.
Well, just before that, there's the little bit about, because it's from Mary's perspective, right? And so Mary's, kind of from Mary's perspective, and so Mary is concerned about this stuff going on, and then when it's revealed that they're friends, there's the little line, Mary, well, I guess I don't have to die for King Theoden today. So Mary has already in his mind committed himself to this cause as well, like completely.
Yep.
Which is just another one of those fantastic little bits of growth of the hobbits over the story.
Mm-hmm.
They get more into that in chapter 4, and it's really great.
Yeah. And,
Yes.
And you bring that up too, and I think that's really kind of neat because we sit there and we also consider that they come of age at 33. This is like the 16 or 17-year-olds signing up to go to war, but before they're legally allowed to join the military.
Yeah.
No
a
one
little bit
ever
like
did
that.
though, right?
Which was a much easier thing to do in the past, like in Tolkien's era, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my great grandfather joined the Navy for World War I when he was only 17. Did the same thing, So yeah, a lot less, not as many databases as there are nowadays, for sure. The suspected ambush, I think I caught a Tolkien doing because the plot needed it to happen, that I wanted to bring up to your guys' attention and see what you guys think. I'm definitely willing to let it, give him a pass on it. I just noticed it and I was like, okay, he did this because it enabled the next thing that he wanted to do, I think. So the riders approach from the rear, right? Which is, if you were expecting a potential ambush, so it'd be, riders approaching from the rear, they would have then turned all their horses, set up a counter ambush, would be what they would try and do. And then Aragorn, inexplicably gets off of his horse and goes to stand next to Theoden's stirrup. And it's kind of standing next to Theoden. And then one of the riders from the other side approaches and is like, "Oh, I was looking for Aragorn." And Aragorn's like, "Well, conveniently, I'm already on the ground to come and hug you." I got kind of I feel like I had a gotcha on it when I was reading it.
Damn it, this book sucks.
I'm not sure I agree. I think it's very easy to write Aragorn sprung from his saddle and embraced his brother, but
sure. But then they wouldn't have been able to do it.
For me, the thing comes to Aragorn. It seems so far up until this point far more comfortable on foot than on horse. Because it was only in the second book that they really got the horses and started moving, and so we'd never really have seen them as combatants on horses or anything like that, right?
Sure.
Not particularly.
But if
So
you had a bunch of mounted riders coming towards you and you were on a horse, whether or not you're comfortable with or without a horse, unless you have a pike to put into the ground, like you're going to stay on your own horse, right?
I'm entirely convinced Legolas saw it coming, and Elrond's sons saw each other, and they just did kind of like the elf signal at each other.
They did maiden hand talk.
Yeah, and Aragorn's like, "No, we're good." And Pippin Merry is just lost. He just missed it. That's my headcanon on it.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily think it's a plot needed this contrivance to happen. I think it's more of a symbolic gesture of Aragorn's standing beside the king. It's because this is one of the things where a lot of the people who talk about Tolkien being a bad writer do not have.
Who says that? Like literally, which person have you encountered? What human being with 23 chromosomes?
You hear it come up occasionally with like Vice articles or Wired articles or.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So not people.
The Payne and McKay types.
AI chatbots.
But the point I'm getting at is they use this type of stuff as Tolkien wasn't so great, but Tolkien is steeped so much in the classical literature, the classical archetypes of heroic stories and heroic endeavors and heroic characters, that when you see some of these motions and actions, to me it's far more one of these things where there's a symbolic element to it, to that character's behavior and that character's actions or that character's words, that has a tradition in the epic tales. And so the symbolic action of standing beside the king.
And I'm glad that you bring that up, because I brought this up almost exclusively just so that haters can't say that we're an echo chamber, because as a White Cloak, I have to be a hater of everything we talk about on this show. I have to nitpick. I have to say things that are wrong. I have to try and be Dane Bornhall because he's reading the chat today instead of commenting. And
you're welcome.
I just need to come up with reasons why I can't have fun.
I guess, Gadfly, if I were responding to that point, I would say, universally Tolkien is considered basically the master of the modern classic, and his symbolism and his thematic messaging is, almost beyond reproach. His prose is, I think it would be fair to say, again, some of the best ever. So if we're combining those two things, and then I suppose the only other element of writing we haven't really touched on then is the coherence of his plot. And if we're taking marks for the coherence of his plot off because, well, in order to get a payoff of a hug, a guy got off his horse early, like, okay, fine, you got a 100 in category A, you got a 100 in category B, and I have to knock you 1 point, so you get a 99 in category C. So your overall score is 299 out of 300. Like, congrats, that's still the greatest that's still the greatest writer ever. But I think you probably are sort of think of me in a very similar vein, but it just the idea that anybody would say that Tolkien's not a great writer, fuck off, just completely nonsensical.
The basis of that argument entirely comes from enviousness. Like it's entirely envy.
Well, it's like that article
it's
that
one
was
of those
written.
things. It's one of those things that it's not subjective. It's not a subjective analysis. It is objectively true that Tolkien is a great writer, and anybody that reads his stuff sees what he does in translations with other things. You can't sit there and deny what his accomplishments were in the literary world, because they're absolutely objectively there.
Let me
The
caveat
comment about
it.
jealousy.
I don't think it's very appropriate to throw shade at a writer that has sold more books than you. So on that basis alone, I think Tolkien's, only really got God to.
Hey,
give him any
Dane,
criticism.
how do you feel about Brandon Sanderson as a writer?
I appreciate Dane's point though, because that is.
I'll
that
wait
is
until I
fairly
sell more copies than Brando. But the thing, maybe I'll go by the word, because the guy just puts out so damn much.
If
but that's part of
Sanderson
the.
writes another 100 books, he'll probably get about half of Tolkien's total sales.
Yeah, but let's just keep it kind of book by book, just because otherwise it's just going to get unfair. Maybe we should start on the Sando criticism. Here's all I want to say about Tolkien and his style. I don't think that there's going to be a writing instructor or editor out there who would recommend someone trying to duplicate Tolkien. In part because you're probably not going to be able to pull it off. In part because people will think it's derivative, but also I think there's an audience that has kind of moved on from this type of literature, and you're much more commonly going to be getting an audience that likes the shorter, choppier sentences, likes a lot of the action to be active and information to come at you through dialogue and not overt exposition. So I kind of view Lord of the Rings, it's a world apart, but if you're reading it and being like, I find this more difficult to read than Harry Potter or an R.L. Stein book or whatever the fuck you read. Yeah, that's the whole damn point of it, right? Don't criticize it for being different. You're reading this because you're trying to elevate your reading game. And with that, I'll go back to monitoring the chat. What is it? Yeah, sorry about that. It is too early to talk about Sando.
To be fair, I was intentionally baiting Dane on that. When Gadfly brought up the point about people being jealous of Tolkien, it just reminded me of like the number of ridiculous puff piece articles that came out about Brandon Sanderson post his Kickstarter about how, that's what's wrong with authors. Like, you shouldn't buy Brandon Sanderson. You should, buy this diversity book candidate because they deserve your money, I guess. Like, don't buy books that you like by authors that you like. You liking those things and those authors is wrong and problematic. And you should buy my book instead. It was almost always you should buy my book instead of the book by this white man, Brandon Sanderson. And it was like, seriously, you can't even recommend somebody else's book. It's literally just saying, give me the money. But anyway, we're off topic.
We are horrible monsters.
Off topic. And yes, that other comment was also baiting Dane when he was saying you can't, you shouldn't, no one would recommend that you try and write like Tolkien. And that was my reason.
I think that's still a valid comment for me. I think like,
100%. Yeah.
And unless you've been Oxford Don professor of Anglo-Saxon literature and you know this stuff backwards and forwards, like, don't try it. That said, if you were trying to get this published in a modern day, even if you were an English professor, I think you'd have a lot of difficulty as well. In part, Tolkien, nobody edited Tolkien because no one had the balls to do it, nor would they. But even modern editors would look at Lord of the Rings and they'd probably say, yeah, we're going to have to change a number of things in order to make it more palatable to a wider audience. They wouldn't have trusted the work to stand up on its own. But that's more of a criticism of modern editors than Tolkien.
Nowadays, though, there is the possibility of self-publishing.
Yeah.
So I mean, fingers crossed. I mean, I've got about a third of Tolkien's credentials in the works, so
Which
maybe
war
I
did
can
you
get a
fight in?
third of his quality.
Gadfly, you might know the answer to this. All of those chairs, all those professor sort of positions at Oxford are typically, they're kind of named sort of sponsored chairs, right? Which position was Tolkien, and do we know who's occupying that chair at Oxford today?
That would be something that would be easy to look up. But usually the chairs are named after a dead person.
Yeah. And I a quick Google, I can't find what chair he occupied. And so it's,
But
I
yeah,
don't know, might be something interesting to see who it is who currently thinks that they're as good as Tolkien. Maybe we can just pillory that guy for the next 10 minutes.
Seamus Heaney, maybe.
it's more so who the college thinks is the best in that discipline at that point in time.
Should we get back to the passing of the Great Company?
It is currently Marion Turner.
Oh, Marion
no
Turner.
Idea who that is.
We're going down a rabbit hole, guys. Come on.
We're just going down a real rabbit hole here. We should stop that. Alex, you can find out and report back. Tell us what scandals she's involved in.
Sounds good.
Somebody earlier mentioned the passage about Gimli questioning because they believe it was Galadriel who sent the message for assistance.
Which we haven't even talked about the message yet, have we?
Yeah,
So
and
you gotta give us the message first.
Gimli's wondering, why didn't we wish for aid and have some stout dwarves or elves beside? And that's when Legolas says, "Oh well, I think they have more on their plate than they can handle right now," and that is a direct callback to the Fellowship and the Council of Elrond, because in the Council of Elrond you have all the different people telling the stories of their peoples and the troubles that they're facing, right?
Yeah.
And Elrond says that Rivendell would be the safest place for the ring to stay temporarily if they weren't going to use it, but inevitably it would get overrun. And so so Rivendell is the only place that can kind of sort of a little bit spare anybody, and then they only spare the Elrond's sons, who by the way are both almost as badass as Glorfindel. So that's saving your best. That's the SAS and the Marines combined, right there.
You're just saying Marines because Pips was one.
Yeah,
he's saying it because it's an accurate analogy.
I have to make sure I stay on the panel somehow in the future.
Yeah, we're booting Dane off for saying that,
Wait,
sort of outlandish comment. Okay, so what was the actual message that they showed up with, right? So there's a banner that was furled, right? So you don't see it at this point. And there's a few messages that we get from Elrond, right? And then from the Lady of Rivendell.
Yeah,
are the things that they show.
Elrond's right? the message from Elrond was like look to the path of the dead or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was something more than that. There was a first line, and then it was a remember the paths of the dead or something like that, right?
Did Aragorn remember the words of the seer and the paths of the dead? Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness.
Remember the words of the seer. That was, I think, the important part, because that's what comes up with Aragorn later when he sort of says what the seer's message was, right? And then what did Lady Arwen have to say, other than that she crocheted the banner herself?
The days now are short. Either our hope cometh, or all hopes end. Therefore I send thee what I have made for thee. Farewell, Elfstone.
I mean, what do you guys think? Is that like a quality gift? Should Aragorn give up Eowyn for that? I mean,
Well, look, I mean, it's not Galadriel's bathwater, but it is.
God, we're not going there. I hope.
Oh, classic.
Could you imagine if these chicks had OnlyFans? For fuck's sake.
No, these chicks wouldn't, but yeah. So yeah, they show up, they pass the message. There's a seer. Like, that's kind of neat. I know Gadfly, do you know who the seer is? Is that Elrond? Because I know Elrond has the gift of foresight.
No, I
That would
think
be weird.
The seer, I think, is referencing an old human woman who is one of the few examples of pure prophecy in Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
As in, like, she's one of the few examples where she says, this is going to happen, and this happens.
It would be weird for it to be Elrond, for Elrond to sort of be like, hey,
Remember me.
I'm sending you a letter. Remember the words that I said previously. Sort of kind of Elrond referring to himself, and that's not even the third person. That's
By his nickname.
yeah.
Sounds like something I would do.
Okay,
I just want to say for this section, what I actually liked about this was coming back to it after watching the movies, obviously more times, but that the line of an elf will go underground and a dwarf dare not, that actually came right out of the book, because I thought that was one of the funniest parts of the film. Although they kind of ad-libbed the other thing, like I'll never hear the end of it, but that message, oh God, lifted right out of the book.
They did a really good job, I think, visually depicting. Was it Dun Hollow, right? And the Paths of the Dead, and the winding path up to it, and all that stuff, right? Like, they did, I think, a really good job of depicting that. Honestly, they did a really good job of depicting Minas Tirith. I mean, we were kind of talking about how the Pelennor could have been depicted better with the townlands and stuff, right? But like, honestly, like, Osgiliath was a decent ruined city. Minas Tirith was, like, I think, a very good Minas Tirith. A lot of that stuff, Edoras was a great Edoras. Like, the set design was amazing on all this stuff. So one thing that happens, though, in this passage is Aragorn revealing himself to Sauron, right? In the movie, we see that happen, and it sort of happens like in the scene where I'm trying to remember what the context that we see it in the movie is. Do you guys recall?
It was after the Battle of Minas Tirith.
Yeah. No, it's in Edoras.
Yeah.
Aragorn goes at night. The Palantir is on the steps leading up to the main dais at Edoras, and Aragorn basically picks it up, looks into it, and just sort of says, "I'm coming for you, bitch." And that's sort of how they handle it.
That does happen in the movie. It's that does happen after Minas Tirith, because that's all on the steps up to the throne in the main hall, and because it's right after he says that we're going to go to the Black Gate, and Gandalf says, well, he'll suspect the trap. Well, you think he'll fall for it? And he's like, oh, I think he will.
Yep, that's right. That's right. You're right.
So the one thing I was going to say is, I mean, it's changed a little bit in context and timing for sure, but what do you guys think about showing versus sort of having Aragorn explain? I think, honestly, like, I really like the way the book or the movie did it. right? I think that they did a pretty good job of showing it.
Well,
I liked where it is in the books, but
I think for the movie, the objective of having Aragorn hold the Palantir is, like Nathan said, it's to distract Sauron and it's to clear orc armies between where Frodo should be in his path to Mount Doom. I think the objective in the story here is to compare and contrast Denethor with Aragorn.
Yep.
They both access the Palantir, and Denethor seems to be corrupted by it. He goes insane from it, or loses all hope and whatnot. And Aragorn he's the king. He's not the steward. He's the one who's got the proper bloodline and strength of will to handle it. And I think that's the objective of them both, or at least Aragorn using the Palantir, is to contrast him with Denethor.
Okay, I think we'll have to talk more about Denethor when we get to that, because I definitely have some thoughts about him as well. Do we want to talk about Eowyn and the Paths of the Dead and all that kind of stuff before we get onto that, though?
I do like the contrast in the dialogue between Aragorn and Eowyn, where Eowyn is focused on the aspect of glory, whereas Aragorn is focused on the aspect of service and duty.
Aragorn was channeling some land, or really vice versa. But I mean, it was you almost expected him to say, like, listen, Arwen, duty is heavier than a mountain.
Glory is fleeting, duty is forever.
Well, it's kind of funny, because not to go all classics on you again.
Please do. That's why you're here.
But
none of us are smart. We bring you on to raise the average IQ.
In the Iliad, the story of Achilles' wrath. There's the passage where his mother Thetis tells him, if you fight in this war, you will die, but your name will live on forever. If you decide to go home, you will live to a ripe old age and die, and nobody will remember you forever. And Achilles is like, well, it's better to live a short life and have your name blazed into that stars than to be forgotten for all time. But in the Odyssey, Odysseus goes into the underworld and talks to the shade of Achilles, and the shade of Achilles says, I wish I was the slave to the lowest of men, just so I could be alive again. And so this idea of
terrible retcon, the Jake Skywalker Achilles,
death or glory, right?
Fuck you, Homer.
Is a continual aspect within the epics, and I probably am in a minority of academics when I say that the true hero and the true paragon in the Iliad is Hector, because Hector, who's one of the Trojans, is fighting his war because he is the prince of the Trojans. It is his duty. It is his responsibility to see the safety of his people. And that is why Hector is fighting, whereas Achilles is just
he's a brute.
Yeah, well, he's an angsty little whiny bitch, right? Like the whole story is him having hissy fit after hissy fit after hissy fit.
Yeah, he feels slighted for this, slighted for that. They took Briseis, then his cousin / lover, I don't know if you want to read into that, Patroclus goes out in his armor to rally the troops. He dies. Hector's just doing his job, basically. And then this Achilles nut job comes at you like, you killed my best friend. It's like, I thought he was you. Not a good enough explanation. At least I think the Troy film from 2004 with Eric Bana playing Hector, I think that film more than, that's on your side. I think Hector's the only character that really comes out looking good in that whole film.
Yeah, Gadfive, when you say the hero, I'm assuming you mean from a morality standpoint, not from a main character standpoint.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say the hero, because the hero in the classical sense is literally just somebody who overcomes adversity, or not even overcomes, but somebody who strives against adversity. That's a hero in the classical sense of the story. But Hector is the paragon of virtue in the Iliad.
Agreed. Also, fuck you, LPK.
I mean, Helen did kind of win the war. She was fine.
LPK's the best.
Yep. So how about that Aragorn just absolutely turning his back on Eowyn, though, huh? I do have to say, we had an interesting conversation about the kind of thirst trap sort of that Eowyn was confronted with. she's the maiden of Rohan. There at Dunhollow with all the women and children and stuff like that. And which one of you guys said, like, all of the Middle Earth's Giga Chads basically show up?
Yeah, Elrond's two sons and the Giga Chads of the Dunedain, the best looking men in the world, all show up. Yeah.
Yep. Dunedain keeping their pimp hand strong.
Yeah, Eowyn was quite literally frothing when this happened.
Then she fell on her knees, saying, "I beg thee, nay, lady," he said, and taking her by the hand, he raised her. Then he kissed her hand and sprang into the saddle. That's very memeable material.
I mean, also, again, she's literally on her knees, and he's just the Sigma Alpha Chad, just like,
shut up.
Right.
It's like you're looking desperate. I'm not into this.
Right.
Would have been a better scene, Instead we have Arwen show up. I don't know. It's meh. And then they head off to the Paths of the Dead, which, okay, I will say, I think the movie probably improved on the Paths of the Dead. What do you guys think? Like, I kind of like that there was some sort of confrontation, whereas instead what we see is like they basically just kind of go through. They see the body of a dead dude who I think we have a good idea who that was based on kind of Theoden's conversations later, right? But they see the body of this dude. They go through some doors. They keep going, and then they just get to the other side, like never really having a confrontation or anything. I think that the movie's handling of the actual sort of like, spirits, ghost army, the dead are following us sort of thing, I despised that. I think it's, kind of poor CGI, a lot of it, and doesn't hold up nearly as well as the rest of the movies, especially when you see the ghost army, like, washing over Minas Tirith,
On Pelennor, in the Pelennor Field sequence, I will agree with you. In the Hall of the Dead sequence, I do not agree.
And that's why I'm saying I think specifically just the Hall of the Dead scene, I think they did a great job in the movie, and I do think it's a improvement when it comes to at least a visual depiction. Like, this would have been a really boring scene, I think, if we just watched it the way that it was written.
So here's what I'll say. When I first saw the film, when they got to the Halls of the Dead, I was like, what the fuck is this? Because none of it registered with me that this was an actual, like, this is a part of the story that, since it had taken so long since I had last read it, I kind of forgot, like, what he was going, what he was doing. And correct me if I'm wrong, like, Aragorn and them, they collect their army of the dead, and they mostly handle basically the battles to the south of Minas Tirith. They don't show up. They don't show up with the army of the dead to defeat the orcs there, but they've relieved enough of the pressure that they could kind of amass a Gondorian army and come to Minas Tirith, if I'm remembering that right. But CGI-wise, if we recall, another film that came out right around the same time was Pirates of the Caribbean. And that's what I didn't like when I saw this in theaters. I immediately thought, oh, is Captain Jack Sparrow going to show up now? Because it looked almost identical. I think perhaps it would have been better if they weren't ghosts, but like, I don't know, Drog?
I think,
Would you call that?
yeah, I think LPK's comment is still valid there as well. Like we're saying the CGI wasn't amazing, but like it still holds up pretty well. I just think that like Alex pointed out, the CGI later is worse than this specific scene. And this specific scene I think was good, and I think we could have seen what Vic is talking about. We could have seen that story instead of the ghost army showing up at Minas Tirith. And I think that it would have been better. It would have used the CGI less. And I don't know. There's some of the complaints that I have about this is mostly the timing issue again, kind of like we talked with, Wheel of Prime, right? Where some of the stuff that was added to the movie prevented us from having the Dunedain and the fights against the Corsairs in the south near Dol Amroth and stuff like that, right? So, for example, having Arwen and Elrond show up, having the elves show up at Helm's Deep, like those types of sequences took time away from bringing in the characters that were there in the chapter. And I like this chapter.
Yeah, I think for me, this section, I mean, it's only like 4 pages long. It's a really brief section of the chapter. And I think what it did more than anything, really, it wasn't there to, I mean, the dead, Legolas says the dead are following, and then you get this intense ride to the Stone of Eric. But I think that all that served was it's more of a deepening of the lore rather than this action sequence and I think that's what Tolkien was intending with it. I personally, the comic stuff from Gimli is probably some of the stuff that drives me nuts the most in the movie. And he gets really comical in the Paths of the Dead section, and that kind of took me out of it with the movie in general. And so when I sit there and I read this, and I'm like, this is, you get the history behind it with Isildur, you get the comments when they get to the Stone of Eric, and it's really what you find out is they've been waiting this entire time for this guy to come in and be there to call them to fulfill the oath that they broke. So they've been almost in a sense of remorse, ghostly remorse, for thousands of years.
And you're talking about Gimli blowing the ghost away.
Yeah, or stepping on the skulls and stuff.
Yep, there was those couple of things. I think that's a good point to bring up. I had honestly kind of forgotten about those in like my recollection of this scene. I'm mostly just thinking of the big cavern and the confrontation between Aragorn showing, the sword, it has been reforged, that kind of thing. Like, I think that was something that visually worked really, really well. And I liked.
I think that works particularly well in the movies because in the movies, the sword gets reforged just before.
Yep.
And so it's the first unveiling of that new blade, whereas the sword has been reforged a long time ago now.
And it's Aragorn's first presentation of himself as the returning king.
Yeah, not even a few months ago. It's like a couple weeks ago.
No, they hung around in Rivendell after the Council of Elrond for a while.
That's right.
So like they stayed like almost a season, right? So okay. The Paths of the Dead was pretty sweet. I really liked a lot of it, but do you guys have any other stuff to add here other than hey, if you notice, there's a passage, an underground, dark, corrupted, whatever passage that apparently horses, don't want to go into, and yet they're like, well, we need the horses for later, so we're gonna have to bring them anyway. Like, it'll be fine. Bring your horses. Unlike if you were to say have all of these people just take their horse and just like slap them on the ass and just leave them out in the wilderness with all their tackle and sort of saddlebags and bit and bridles on. Anyone understanding what I'm talking about here?
Yeah, well,
Nay.
it doesn't make sense to abandon your horse when you're going to need it on the other side.
Yeah. All right. So after the passing of the Grey Company, we have the muster of Rohan. Starts out with Theoden and his riders basically getting up to Dunharrow, right? And it ends with the introduction of Dernhelm.
Best character. Love that guy. Oh, wait, what?
I think the way
there's a couple things about Dernhelm that I really am struck with, the chest region.
Yeah, Dernhelm has a really stunning personality, is what I'm getting on the page.
Well, they cast him well, in terms of the chest region.
There are a couple things early on in this chapter that I really think are worth focusing on. The short little bit of dialogue between Eomer and Theoden. Or is it Harrowdale at last, said Eomer. Our journey is almost at an end. They halt, blah, blah, blah. The journey is over, maybe, said Theoden said, but I have far yet to go. So on and so forth. But if you would take my counsel, said Eomer in a low voice, you would then return hither until the war is over, won or lost. Then Theoden smiled, nay, my son, for so I will call you. Speak not the soft words of worm tongue in my old ears. And then it continues further. But so this idea, Theoden in his old age is still seeing beyond the next step, right? And Eomer not quite so much, being a young man. But also Eomer in his care for Theoden is giving him the bad advice Wormtongue was. So that this is one of those little bits of the road to hell is paved with good intentions type of snippets here, and it's another building of that relationship between Theoden and Eomer, and the development of that whole nature and that whole ending arc to it. But just that little bit of Theoden having such a clear focus of his goal and his end achievement, and not looking to the right nor the left of it. And the whole chunk is riddled with bits of Theoden. Well, if I get back, right? Some might call it a little heavy-handed foreshadowing, but that's the whole point of the whole conflict, right? Theoden knows this is every engagement he has now with the enemy is likely to be the last, and yet he still has that laser precision focus now that he's had his mind cleared.
Yeah, and essentially calling Eomer his heir,
Yeah.
in his response.
Yeah.
So we also got the messenger from Gondor who showed up in this section, right? The red arrow. was brought to them in Dunharrow, right? Theoden's conversation, I think, with the messenger is kind of is interesting as well. He almost kind of like reading it or listening to it. I feel like you almost get the impression that like he's kind of toying with the dude. Dude's like, "Hey, we really need you guys' help," and instead of just being like, "Yeah, I've already called for the muster of all of able-bodied men in Rohan to go to your aid," because like, dude, this is so last week, man. Like, we know what's going on. Gandalf was here. You're only coming to ask for me because Gandalf showed up over there. Like, we're ahead of you. He instead is like, "Oh, I don't know, man. I don't know if we'll be able to send that many people. I don't know. It's going to take us a long time to get all of our boys together." Yeah,
it's one of those things you almost want to like. Sir, have you looked around? You're literally in the muster camp. Like, this is where we gather. But I do think it's interesting that he even includes this part. I mean, I feel like in a lot of series they would have basically just said, and then they rode for Minas Tirith. Like, they wouldn't have taken into account the logistics of, okay, I need to send everybody. I need to hit every town in 100 miles of where I'm at right now. I need to get a rider to go there. Tell everybody, "Hey, dummies, get your horses, your pikes, and your armor. We need to get back to camp, and then we're going to go."
Well, this scene is a direct comparison to the previous chapter, right, where Aragorn goes to the land of the Oathbreakers, who are cursed forever, whereas Theoden, who acknowledges that even if Rohan get to Gondor may have fallen by that time, but he's still going to fulfill the oath of his ancestors from generations ago, right? So yeah, it is a bit of that funny back and forth. Theoden already, we know Theoden's mind. Theoden's mind is to ride to Gondor, whether Gondor calls for aid or not. But Gondor receiving the red arrow, which is like symbolic message of like Gondor is at death's door type of thing. It's a direct connection to the previous chapter, and just another one of these little snippets.
I really liked the so the question there was asked about, hey, do we like the beacons of the red arrow? So I like in the movie, I think if you're going to pick one, and you'd kind of have to pick one for a movie with the condensing that they're having to do, I like the beacons over the red arrow. I don't like the whole, Pippin lighting the beacon. Like, that scene was annoying. I liked the idea that Denethor was involved in the defense, and he didn't really like fall apart until Faramir's death, right? Or presumed death. I like the fact that he was cunning and conniving and doing stuff, right? So I like the beacons for the movie. I think visually that shot of the beacons being lit is like
so wrong.
Cinematic, awesomeness. I think it's this very cool visual shot, whatever.
It's one of the worst. I'll say the music going is fantastic.
Yeah, that's a combination of the two things together. It was great.
No. But what was terrible about it is it pulled me completely out of the film, because all I could think of is, who the fuck is waiting on mountaintop after mountaintop the whole way across this land to light these beacons?
Which was really, again, just a function of how they sort of chose to do it. So yeah. I'm not saying that the way they did it was perfect. I'm saying that between those two, if you were going to pick one of them to show the audience in a visual medium, the beacon fires, I think, is the better one. Should there have been fewer beacon fires, and should it have made more logical sense and whatever? Maybe. But, the visual scene was great. I think a lot of people really like that scene because just the visual is really awesome.
Yeah, they're showing the mountains, but what they should have done, if I can gripe about it, but the beacons as described in the book, right? It's going from town to town and village, and like there are areas across Gondor. Like you could think of it, it would be more like I don't know,
Paul Revere.
rural Germany or England, and every church steeple had a beacon up top of it, so you could see like the beacons are lit and the people are getting being called. But there's no system in the world
Gandalf describes them on the mountains. He describes the beacons as lighting on, and he lists the name of each of the peaks.
You know, you put your shittiest, least reliable people, your genuine fuck ups. You know, you send them 6 months away by walk and say, hey, you know, the 12 of you are stuck out here on this beacon. And that's your life and your service for the next 6 months, and then you get to come home.
That would suck so much. You would die on top of those mountains.
I think I can say with confidence that there has been shittier duties pulled by like 100% shittier duties. In fact, a lot of lance corporals would probably be like, I'll sign up for that. You mean nobody gives me shit for the next 6 months, and all I have to do is just make sure one of us is sober enough to notice another fire? like sign me up, boss. I'll take that. So
yeah,
anyway,
Trip nailed it in the comments.
Which one? Oh, yeah.
Wait,
yeah.
Did you have to go on one of those pips?
No. Okay. The point that I wanted to make though is that from a historical perspective, and Gadfly, maybe you can tell me this. The red arrow, I think, was actually like a much better one. And the reason that it's important that it's a red arrow instead of like a verbal message or a scroll or something like that is like if the messenger was like waylaid on the road and killed or whatever, a red arrow is like a wooden arrow painted red. Like that's not valuable. No one would steal that. So like, you know, random bandits or whatever are probably just going to leave that. They're going to steal the horse. They're going to steal his money, maybe his sword, whatever. But like the body in this red arrow will probably just be laying there on the side of the road. And the red arrow is the message. So like if the outrider is killed, anybody else who finds this will actually, if it's somebody who's supposed to receive this message, will know what the message is. So I actually really liked that.
Yeah, it's sort of a codified language between the between the two nations, the two nations' governments, really.
Yep. And it shows a long-standing history of mutual, martial aid as well, right? Like the only reason you have a system like that of, a yellow arrow means like, hey, it would be nice if you could send some boys. A red arrow means like, yo, grab up a posse and let's do this, So I liked what that added to the relationship between Gondor and Rohan. In the movies, they made it sound like, the beacons of Minas Tirith, and it's like, well, when were they? Where were they when all of this happened? It's like where we really know that actually they've historically have done a lot of help for each other, right?
Well, it goes back to the history of the nations, right? Because way back the people of what became Gondor gave the land to the Rohirrim.
Yeah.
And so that was that ancient connection between the two people, and so it's calling back to that that shared heritage, the shared history, and playing upon that ancient connection, right? Trip was asking about up higher in the chat about whether there was historical context for the idea of the beacons, and as far as I'm aware, nothing quite as extensive as that in terms of one beacon signaling another beacon as being like a particularly common trait, but having a signal, like a big flaming signal that people could see, being a symbol for something, definitely. And then like there have been instances of individuals setting up some sort of sequence of beacons, but not like a nation setting up some sort of thing like that.
Yeah.
At least until semaphore towers became technology. So yes and no. There is historical precedent for it, but not at a large scale like that. Because the other thing is these beacons aren't being sent just to Rohan, right? They're being sent to call all the other nations around, right?
Yeah.
So
Google says it's the Byzantine Empire.
I felt like there was a similar thing of a system of towers that did it, but I not nearly historically savvy enough to say which specific one.
So the Byzantine beacon system was a main line of beacons stretched 450 miles in the open spaces of Central Asia Minor. I don't think
that probably explains why it wasn't used very much, because that got overtaken by the various Islamic forces.
Yes. I was going to say it didn't stop the Ottomans.
No.
Let's see.
The Arabs first, and then the Turks, and then
all right. So we have here Mary getting dismissed from Theoden's service and told to stay behind in Edoras, right?
And once again, this is one of those things where it's a cruelty out of love, right? And I do think the films did this bit quite well, where Theoden just does not want harm to befall the hobbits, right? So that's one of the things about the hobbits, and why they are very childlike in the stories, is because children bring about a sense of innocence and all that sort of stuff, the stuff that you are trying to protect and provide for. And so Theoden not wanting Merry to face the rigors and the horror of war, even though Merry was part of the force that took Isengard, right?
But that was like a frolic, really, for what's coming. They like rode on Treebeard, and then they got to smoke a bunch. Like, good on them and whatnot, but I think, But I mean, if this is going to be your attitude, I'm kind of wondering, why did they make him a squire in the first place?
Well,
it's kind of like, here's your new job, and now I'm taking it away from you.
Well, they talk about it a little bit, that I don't want to say they made him basically the mascot, but they said, they basically think of him as a child, and like they even say how they're, they're all heartened seeing their king, doing, having meals and talking with what they basically see to be almost like a child. And it sort of goes back to the king is the father of the nation. And they even very explicitly use that language. But no, now it's daddy's got to go to work, so the fucking midget that he's hanging out with has to go back to town and not get killed by a pike.
He also didn't eliminate his job. He just said, well, you're not going to be my squire. You're going to serve Éowyn.
Which, hey, foreshadowing. Friggin' baggage. I love that he has a conversation with a writer later who just calls him a bag. Like it was his like POV. Then you're like, oh, like maybe sort of a joke, and then he's like, actually, no, I just called you baggage. Hilarious. I think he calls him Master Bag, which I liked because very close to Master Baggins.
Bilbo baggage.
Yeah.
He would pick a pocket.
I guess we mentioned earlier Durnhelm, and that's kind of where this ends. That a smaller, lighter rider of Rohan picks up Master Baggage and offers to take him along. And I like that Mary is super dense. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine not noticing for like however long they're riding.
I remember being 10 years old and reading this and thinking Durnhelm was a dude.
Well, it's because you only get presented a certain amount of information.
Oh, come on. You guys talk about it in hindsight. Like, for Durnhelm was less in weight than many men, though lithe and well knit in frame.
But Durnhelm talks to him. Like, not much. It says specifically, like, mostly didn't talk to anybody, right? But writer, like, oh, you don't know who I am? You can call me Durnhelm. Like that's enough dialogue. Mary should have known what was up.
Not if she was doing like the fake deep voice, like the
let's
the men playing women playing men in Monty Python. Are there any women here? No. Like that.
I think this is also way too close to the Dunedain and Aragorn showing up. He's sharing a saddle with this person. Like, what? We're not supposed to think that it's just damp and slick.
and now we're canceled.
That's why she had to hold on to him.
God damn it, Pips.
But no, I as somebody who just watched the recent Spider-Verse movie, apparently people can have like full conversations with their own child and not recognize them. So apparently you can you might not notice a thing like pitch.
Yeah.
All right, fine. We'll allow it.
This is the don't ask, don't tell version of Middle Earth.
All right, that brings us on to the Siege of Gondor, which, man, just such a great chapter. I think that I liked every part of this. This was so good from front to back, right? You got Pippin, and he's got his new uniform. He's doing stuff. Faramir comes back, retreating, and Gandalf has to go and like kind of, I don't know, cast the Nazgul away with his awesome powers, right? So he shows up, blinds them with some light and stuff. They go away. The movie tried to depict that a little bit. And then Faramir gets brought back in. We get the whole kind of accounting. We have the scenes that you guys talked about with Denethor and Faramir and Gandalf sort of squaring off a little bit. We had some lines that were, I think, picked pretty directly into the movie, but I don't like the contextual change with Faramir going back out to Osgiliath, right? And then it just goes through the fall of Osgiliath, the fall of the sort of outer garrisons of the Pelennor, the actual start of the siege. So fires lit all across the field, the catapults throwing flaming artillery, and the heads of the fallen men of Gondor into the city. You see Faramir come back after a sortie with Gandalf and the men of Dol Amroth sort of leading it to recover Faramir, and the outer garrisons are all finally in. The gate is completely shut now, and the siege is fully locked in. And we see Gandalf sort of having to take charge of the defense of the city because Denethor sort of falls apart at the loss of his son. And this is the thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'd be curious before we get into the details, maybe what you guys think of this. I think that I don't like the changes that they did to Faramir in the story. And I don't like the changes that they did to Denethor either. I think that the movie makes Denethor look like a fool and makes him be kind of cruel towards his children, right? Whereas the book, I feel like Denethor, I like the way Gandalf put it, that like Denethor had love for Boromir, who was his son, but not like him, but didn't have that relationship with Faramir. And it's kind of like, they're too much alike, maybe. And so they don't get on very well, right? That Faramir is far-seeing and deep thinking and all these things. And so he comes up with his own sort of counsel, and it's not always the same as his father's, and there's enough will that they contend against each other. Whereas I think Boromir was more of a blunt instrument for his father's will, right? And that's why Denethor liked him better. And I think that's a really good dynamic. And then we see Denethor, being not necessarily great as a king, even though he's just a steward. But he doesn't actually fall apart until Faramir comes back, and he kind of realizes that, like, I sent my son to his death for almost nothing, and I didn't even, I never told him that I loved him, sort of thing, And the line that Gandalf tells Faramir before he leaves, that your father, loves you and he'll remember it ere the end, all sort of leans into that and sets it up. And there's what I believe is strongly hinted at, that Faramir comes back and Denethor goes up and looks into the Palantir and, has an interaction with Sauron. And that's where Sauron breaks him. That Sauron takes advantage of the fact that he's now lost both of his children, and shows him probably images of the ruin of Gondor, and he falls apart and decides the whole, like, we'll burn like the old kings, the old sort of heathen kings of old, right? And I like that narrative better than the movie Denethor. What do you guys think?
Yeah, totally agree.
I agree. Go ahead, Nathan.
In the book, he's a much deeper character in the book. So much deeper. He's really, honestly, the movie presents him pretty paper thin, to the detriment of the storytelling, and so I would agree with you wholeheartedly there.
Yeah, the conflict as well surrounding Denethor, Faramir, and Gandalf, right? Like, it's
so good.
You see Denethor throwing those barbs at Faramir, being like, "Oh well, you take advice from Gandalf, but not from your own father, or you obey Gandalf, but not the steward of Gondor, your father and lord, right?" And so that's another one of those things that leads to that notion of both of them being very insightful, wise for human beings, individuals. Just Denethor just lost a certain amount of care for something somewhere down the lines, and the idea of him using the Palantir to gain wisdom and knowledge and understanding being the way that things creeped in to unsettle him.
So do you think that the Denethor we see in the books is a being who has been corrupted by the Palantir when we kind of first see him, or do you see him as a being, as a character who is grieving the loss of his favorite son? Because so I look at it as like the reason that he's so at odds with Gandalf and with Faramir, and with the reason he's on such edge is, he's, when we first see him, he's literally holding Boromir's hewn helm in his lap, right?
Horn.
Like
the Horn of Gondor.
Sorry. Yeah, I said helm. You're right. That to me, like he's grieving, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
it's
so he
that.
makes poor decisions and says hurtful words in haste because he's at the raw sort of edge of his
It's
control.
that. It's that grieving and that loss that sends him on the path, right? So they know Boromir. They know of Boromir's death for some time now, right? And
Yeah.
So he's already entered this. He's been in this stage of grief for a while, and there has been many opportunities for his mind to be corrupted because of that, right? That's the way I see it.
Gotcha. My understanding of this was always that Denethor's a pretty bright guy.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to sort of use the Palantir effectively. And it's only as Sauron sort of started to become more powerful that he was able to sort of use that corrupting influence to mess with Denethor. And much in the way that Boromir, you see, is tempted by the ring and is starting to lose hope because he sees Gondor slowly falling to Mordor. Denethor is suffering from that same thing. So, and Sauron is sort of using, it's not the same corrupting power as the ring, but that's something that his sort of abilities have always done. So he's slowly corrupting Denethor with hopelessness. And then Denethor loses Boromir, and that hopelessness sort of becomes more impactful to the point that it really
which is literally a line from the books, right? It's his two weapons, right? Are hunger and despair.
Yep.
Yeah.
And and the other thing is Denethor is like Faramir. Faramir is the scholar, whereas Boromir was the warrior. Denethor was more like Faramir. So when Denethor sees, Faramir associating with Gandalf, yes, Faramir is associating with Gandalf because Faramir is the scholar and Gandalf is a source of all the worldly wisdom on earth. Of course, the scholar is going to associate with the wizard who knows everything in the world. So that's, his accusation that Faramir associates with Gandalf isn't wrong. Geez, I could talk about this for a while. The other
like
thing
jealousy, right? It's the jealousy of a grieving father who is jealous for his remaining son.
Yep. And it
Alex,
also
keep going. This is a good roll. Go for it.
It also takes into account, and Denethor speaks to this, the idea of it's almost nationalism versus globalism. Denethor takes a very nationalistic mindset on the survival of Gondor. Gandalf says, I care for the well-being of, every creature and all of the good in Middle-earth, whereas Denethor's, that's great, buddy. I care mostly about this particular citadel, but I guess I sort of care about the outreach of my nation. I don't give a fuck about the elves. And for anybody that says they do care about the elves, well, what the fuck are the elves going to do if Gondor falls? So that's kind of his position as well. There's a lot going on with Denethor. There's complicated guy.
Yep. Yeah. Well, in terms of the influence of Sauron, I always saw this. Partially, yes, he's grieving for Boromir, and so he's trying to come to terms with that. But I think the influence of Sauron is a much longer game than what we see in the context of the book, and it's a lot like working with marble. You're chipping away at this big hunk of rock, and it's not going to look like you're progressing towards anything for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's going to start to take shape, and that's kind of what Sauron does with Denethor. He just kind of chips away because, once again, Denethor is just as fallible a man as anybody else. And so over time, that's going to become more effective, especially when that despair and that grief really start to take stepping stairs towards downward into the depths.
Well, the other thing about Denethor, right, is it says he favored Boromir because he was not like him. But to me, like, that's one of those things where you look at Denethor's history, right? And he in his youth retook Osgiliath, right? So he was an accomplished warrior, accomplished general, all that sort of accomplished captain. But it's just one of those things where it's like Boromir was just better at that type of stuff, and so you can see Denethor looking and thinking like, if I had more of Boromir's military capabilities, then I could have pressed further. We could have taken all of Osgiliath and held it better and taken back all this stuff. And so when he looks at Boromir and sees, like, that's what he's seeing. He's seeing Gondor reclaiming all of that taken land.
Yep. And that your point is emphasized by the line when Denethor is talking shit about Faramir. And he says to Faramir, you'd think to style yourself one of the kings of old, a noble king in a time of peace, but this is not a time of peace. This is a time of war. And, the implication there is, I don't want a king for a peacetime. I don't want a princeling of a peacetime. I want a princeling of a wartime, which is what Boromir is.
So what do you guys think about a line that, what was Bergen's dad's name again? I'm blanking on it. So his description of Faramir. So, basically saying he's bold, more bold than many deem. For in these days, men are slow to believe that a captain can be wise and learned in the scrolls of lore and song as he is, and yet a man of hardihood and swift judgment in the field. For such is Faramir, less reckless and eager than Boromir, but not less resolute. Like, I think a big part of the story of Denethor, I think that it is Denethor misjudges his two sons because Faramir is headstrong, because he is smart and is coming to his own conclusions, and he and his father disagree, potentially because of some of the corruption that his father has been experiencing with the Palantir, right? But they have grown apart and disagreeable with each other, and Denethor, I think, misjudges between his two sons, and the fall of Denethor is, I think, his final, Sauron's ultimate corruption of him, that he uses the loss of now his entire lineage and the impending death of Gondor with the siege now upon them, right? But it's also Denethor's final realization of who his son was, that his son asked him, when I return, think better of me. And I think that was almost like a curse that he put on his father. And he comes back and his father realizes how he had misjudged his son this whole time.
Yeah. Parting words are very important. In the whole story, but like that idea of the princeling of peace and the princeling of war, right? Like, it's only so good if you take the territory, if you can hold it and keep it.
Yep.
And so Boromir's recklessness can lead to victories in battles and skirmishes, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a
better outcome,
victory of the campaign, right?
Yeah. I want to make a football reference here, but I sometimes run into this with inside linebackers. Coaches love inside linebackers that come downhill fast, make big hits, make tackles for loss. But a lot of times you're sometimes better off with a slightly smarter guy who, doesn't immediately react to what he sees in front of him. He occasionally will recognize that, something is a fake. And a lot of times you have to talk sort of the old school coaches off of, I know that this one guy has 13 tackles for loss this year, but he's also allowed 9 touchdowns. So maybe let's go with the slightly smarter, less athletic guy.
It's the difference between being able to react to a play and being able to read a play, right?
Yes.
If you can read the play, you can determine everything and be in the right place at the right time before you need to react to it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's good to be stupid and react to the first thing you see, because the first thing you see is the thing that's happening. Whereas, if you're smarter, you pause, you look at it, you think about it, and by then maybe the running back's past you. But you need both, basically, is what I'm saying.
I think that one of the things, and it's really that what you just said, Alex, that you need both, right? So Boromir is, the way Boromir is described in my mind is Boromir was probably like a really awesome sergeant, like a dude who, like, hey dude, we need to take that hill, right? And Boromir is gonna get it done, right? Like, he and a couple of his boys, like, they're gonna go up there and he can take on 10 dudes to his one, and is just gonna be a bull in a china shop and just wreck anything between him and the objective and just take it, right?
There's going to be a pile of fucking orc heads at his feet.
Exactly.
To get that hill. Yeah.
Exactly. And like, you 100% need good sergeants. But I have worked with a lot of good sergeants who have become really terrible staff sergeants or lieutenants and captains, because they are really great at doing things and really bad at figuring out what things need to be done. And so Faramir he's a great captain, right? Like, that's what he is actually good at. And I think that you often see, and there's we have there's a colloquial expression, the too many cooks in the kitchen, or we say too many chiefs and not enough Indians. When you have,
do we?
like I said, it's a within the military, it's a colloquial sort of expression.
It's still allowed.
Yeah, we're still allowed, exactly. But the idea,
fucking canceled.
Dude, we're never monetized anyway. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Okay.
The point is that Faramir and Denethor would butt heads with each other in a way that Boromir would not, and in the way that you're talking about, Alex, where you need both people. Faramir needed more Boromirs. He didn't feel like he needed more Faramirs, because he was the guy doing that. He was the quarterback calling the shots, or he was the offensive coach. And Faramir was like, hey, I have some interesting ideas about different plays that we should do. And he's like, shut up, man. Like, my plays won Osgiliath the last time. Like, I know what I'm about.
It's the strategic sphere versus the tactical sphere.
Yeah.
We want to, yeah.
So, like, going back to Baragon, this is the kind of stuff that increases the view of Faramir, is when he's getting he's out in the field and Baragon is on the wall and he's looking out and he sees Faramir, and he goes through this whole statement and ends with help, will no one go out to help him, Faramir. With that, Baragon sprang away and ran off into the gloom, ashamed of his terror, while Baragon of the guard thought at first of the captain of whom he loved. Pippin just got up and peered out. And so this whole thing with Baragon, he's not even worrying about the context of maybe Gandalf's going to go out and get him. He's going to get outmatched. He's going to get destroyed if he goes out, but he loves Faramir.
He's a fanboy.
Yeah.
Any more thoughts about the Siege of Gondor kind of chapter here? Obviously, we we have the actual breaking of, we have the fire in the outer rings, we have the actual breaking of the gates, which that part the movie adapted really well. The ram and the way that it kind of functioned was, again, I think really well done. Didn't quite show down the same way, right? They had the thing, whatever comes through that door, stand your ground or whatever, right? And it's like some big trolls, whereas in the book it's just the Lord of the Nazgul who just walks in like mano y mano. It's like, I left my army outside, I don't need it.
Well, and
Mano y
that's
mano.
they transition that up in the ramparts, right?
They do
with him on his flying steed, and then give him the power to break Gandalf's staff, which irritated the piss out of me. No one really. I think that was a misjudgment by the guys who made the movies. That, you know what, Gandalf would not be bested by a Nazgul. There's a strong argument to sit there and say that the Nazgul might be able to hold his own.
No,
but Gandalf is. I mean, hell, they can't stand him when he's shooting a beam of light at him out in the middle of a field. Why do you think head to head there's going to be a competition like this?
I mean, the only thing you have to remember is Gandalf won Balrog 0.
Right, and that
was lame. In the book, that wasn't avenging angel of God given God's power. Gandalf at this point could probably bitch slap Sauron. He's just not allowed to.
Right. Well, and in the book, both in the book and the movie, the Nazgul is distracted then by the sound of the horns of the Rohirrim. Well, when he's got Gandalf like he does pinned in the movie, why would you worry about those horns? It doesn't make any sense to me anyway. Here, when he just enters the courtyard of the first gate, he hears the horns, and you don't even know that he necessarily leaves. But it makes a lot more sense that he would go back out and see what's going on in the battle, because he ends up going back out to end up take care of Theoden. But so the transposition of the scene with the Nazgul really bothered me. But it ends on such a note where you're just like, what, the horns? And then all of a sudden it's right to the Rohirrim, and it's great.
Yeah, the Rohirrim there being so epic really does help with that, because as you're seeing the Rohirrim, it makes complete sense to you. Oh yeah, no, I totally get why Nazgul Boy has to go deal with that. There's a lot of pissed off dudes that look like Gadfly that just showed up.
That's right. Beware of the Gadfly.
So just because
hang on, I got to go do something.
Because we already started this conversation, we might as well have it out. Sven in the chat said, "Which king greater than Gandalf 1v1?" It sounds like we're all against that. I just want to point out. So let's put the points on the side here, right? So which king was a king and sorcerer, but ultimately human, right? Who gained one of the rings of power and was probably given some special sauce from Sauron, right? So he's a human at like max power, right? Like as powerful a being as any human could probably get to, right? And then you have Gandalf, who is the Tolkienian equivalent of an angel, who also has a ring of power. And like Alex pointed out, We're back. We're back in. We're still live. Are we still?
Yep.
It never booted me out. I don't know what the fuck happened.
No, they saw Gadfly's sword and got scared.
Is that wait?
All right. It looks like we're still on the stream, right?
Yep.
Is it?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, hey, that was weird. I guess we got Gadfly brought a sword out, and the YouTube algorithm was like, a white dude with a sword, ban it now.
Either that,
This
or we
is a
know
knife.
we know YouTube is Team Witch King.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, YouTube is Team Witch King. So depending on where that cut out, Witch King as fully powered up as a human can be, Gandalf as like close to as fully powered up as an angelic figure can be, right? I don't think it's much of a competition. What do you guys think? Is there more of an argument there?
There's not.
No.
There kind of is, because
Stop it, Gadfly.
the Maiar taking
It's gonna get us
human
canceled
form
again.
diminishes their power, but at the same time, it's like the Witch King only actually has like a fraction of Sauron's power, and Gandalf is comparable to Sauron. So,
But I got my example. I got my argument as to why maybe the Witch King's acting like this bitch king. It's probably because he at least reveals later he's got a prophecy that no man can kill him.
Yeah. To which
So
the
he's
response would
looking
be,
at
I'm not
Gandalf being like, "You can't kill me."
Although
No,
he
man.
should know that Gandalf's not actually a man.
Yeah, Gandalf's response would be, I'm a Maiar, not a man.
Yeah.
Well,
I look at this as this is kind of a necessary confrontation. It's the leader of one side versus the leader of the other, kind of thing.
once again, it's that typical epic. The two leaders of the forces always have to come together. Heroic personal combat is a part of the epic tale, whether you actually see it or not. I mean, going back to the Iliad, there's so many instances that are absolutely hilarious. There's a fella who actually engages in battle with Aphrodite and wounds her, and she gets so pissed off but has to leave the battlefield. What's his name? Begins with a D. But yeah, gave Aphrodite the D.
Wait, what?
But no, the only reason the Witch King has any confidence here is Gandalf is handcuffed in the sense that he's not allowed to directly intercede and have an effect. So the Witch King is basically gambling that Gandalf beating his ass would count as direct interference, to use a Wheel of Time term, in the pattern.
So the Witch King's plan is basically he's like, yeah, as soon as Gandalf starts trying to, come at me with Glamring is his sword, right? Am I remembering the name right?
Yeah.
So as soon as Gandalf draws that and starts coming at me, he's gonna get like yoinked out of existence by.
I think based on the rules, Gandalf's allowed to use the sword. He wouldn't be allowed to use his staff and simply nuke him out of existence. Is at least the interpretation of it that I've seen that is the most convincing to me.
Okay. Well, Sven, I know that we disagree. That's because, as we like to say here, we are not an echo chamber.
We are not an echo chamber, just so it's all clear. Right, Alex? We're not an echo chamber?
Not an echo chamber.
Exactly.
Yes, we are.
Chamber.
But there's certain things we are allowed to agree on.
So we don't get to see the showdown, though, right? It's about to happen. Like the Gondorian soldiers on one side behind Gandalf and the orcs behind the other side are sort of like they're kind of snapping and like doing their sort of best kind of West Side Story showdown thing, right? And then a big horn kind of sounds, right? And you're like, the Rohirrim have arrived. And you're like, damn it, Tolkien, you tease.
This is some literally WWE shit. Like we're about to see John Cena and The Rock wrestle, and then it's like, tune in next week at WrestleMania.
Yes, exactly that. Oh, did we talk about Gandalf's response to this? Is probably the last thing that I had from this chapter. Gandalf's response to hearing Faramir's conversation, like, you're actually not the first Hobbit that I've seen, and like the last one I saw, I was sending off to Cirith Ungol, and Gandalf being like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, well, because that is the direction of where the dark is pouring into the world, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh,
Gandalf
Frodo's
doing
in
some
the
quick
epicenter
mental
of
math, trying to figure out, like, so is the venture lost?
Yeah.
He even asked him, like, all right, when, where, what are my chances of getting on Shadowfax right now, chasing his ass down and bringing him back here? Fuck.
Yeah, good point. He was kind of ready to ride out on Shadowfax.
Yeah, literally the equivalent of, God, I hope that works out.
Oh. All right. No other comments on that one. We want to move on to the ride of the Rohirrim, the last chapter we're covering today.
And our
Absolutely.
hero, Durnhelm.
And our hero.
Considering the time.
Yep. Okay. Well, cool. Then we'll move on to the ride of Rohirrim. It starts by, again, all of these chapters have kind of like, they progress their own story and they go to the other POV back a few days and they like catch it up. And then, so the Minas Tirith story is like the driving sort of like, the arrow of time. The Minas Tirith story is the tip. And then it's kind of, dragging the other POVs along with it, I feel like. So, 4 days earlier, essentially, we got the riders. They're on the road. They've been traveling. They get some help from some random wild men. Gonbury Gon was the name of the dude. And they're like, yeah, let's go follow this random path through the woods to get around. It sounds like some outriders maybe from Sauron's army that had been kind of positioned on the road between Rohan and Gondor, right? To like stop them up. So they do a, no one expects the riders of Rohan to go through the lowlands, and they sort of pull that plan and get onto the field of the Pelennor, watching essentially they show up, and from their distance and remove, they can hear the gates crash. And that's what like wakes Theoden up, because they show up, they see the city burning, they see the field of orcs, and they're like, it's too late. And Mary has the thought of like, are we about to like turn around? Are we about to be like, oh, this is lost. Like, let's go back and try and protect our own holds and stuff. And then the gates get crashed down, and Theoden, gets kind of awakened, right, and decides like, nope, let's go. Pretty sweet chapter, I feel like, especially the end. Gosh, the end is crazy, right?
Yeah. Arise, riders of Theoden, fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter. Spear shall be shaken, shield be splintered. A sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride to Gondor. So the movie took some good parts of that.
Yeah.
Slightly different, but it's great.
Well, some of the speech that Theoden gives earlier in the book, they incorporate some of that into his big speech at Pelennor Fields.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah, this the introduction of the wild men of the Grey Wood and Gan Buri Gan, and that sort of aspect. It's another one of those displays of this being a conflict of the whole world against the orcs and Sauron, right?
Yeah.
And so people are putting aside their distaste for each other, their differences, and all that sort of stuff, and coming together.
Yeah, it's a uniting against a single foe that is clearly the evil of the world, where the point of view of the recognition of goodness that exists isn't muddled. It's something that is clearly in focus, clearly recognizable, and the forces that are on the side of good are in a clear position of being able to recognize that very evil and do so.
Yeah. One of the things that gets brought into this, right, is the arrogance of the Witch King or Sauron in the complacency with which he sort of protects his flank while attacking Minas Tirith, right? So he sends like an okay screening force, but apparently not very well positioned or led. And the few people who are the few orcs that are left at the townland's kind of wall along the road are actually tearing the wall down, right? Like, because they have that conversation like there's a wall and like some fortifications and stuff there that like only a few orcs could hold against us long enough to really disrupt our ability to kind of come in and deal a decisive blow, right? And then Theoden's kind of outriders and scouts come back and they're like, there's barely anybody there. And they're like they're exclusively concerned with tearing things down and like breaking stuff. And then when they actually show up on the field, obviously they're completely distracted and very singularly focused, kind of myopic in their focus on the city. And then there's the wind of change that comes, which we might have to save conversation about that until next week. Well, 2 weeks from now.
In the pantry.
Yep. And Gadfly's mic is still on.
Sorry,
sharing that office.
A little dog locked in the room next door, trying to get out.
Oh no.
Fitzy is MIA from Danes. Are you guys? I know you're both Canadian, and from watching the South Park episode, Canada is basically one road. Are you guys? Is it one building? Are you guys in the same building? Is Fitzy escaping?
No, but it is one road, and actually, the easier way to get from east to west or west to east is not to take that road, but actually go down into Minnesota.
Well, now
so there's that.
Depending on the COVID restrictions, right? Because you might not be able to get back across the border.
Either way, it's still easier than fucking going through Ontario and Canadian Shield territory. The worst. No one drives across Canada, anyways.
Fair enough. I don't know. I mean, short of getting really into stuff that we'll cover next week. Do you guys have anything else that you want to cover with this, or can we kind of wind up and we'll just talk about what we talk about next time?
Just pointing out that you're talking about Sauron being kind of loose with his formation, so to speak, but his south and the coast are supposed to be covered, right? The south by the Haradrim coming up and the Corsairs on the coast, right? And the riders of Rohan are supposed to be days away from where they are, thanks to the Wildmen leading them swiftly. And so Yeah, he just allows the orcs to engage in orcish behavior of just pure destruction, right? That's what the orcs are. They're not a culture. They're not a whatever. They're just an embodiment of destruction.
Well, I think that's probably pretty valid. I still think that it shows something of how much Sauron is also distracted by his focus on his plan and his and events, and maybe honestly Aragorn revealing himself and some other stuff there might play a role with that as well, because Sauron also has the control of the Palantirs, right? That's how he has the vision that is sort of shown in the movies as the great eye, right? That plus his just innate abilities. And he is missing a lot of movement that's happening on the board. So
yeah, well, he's focused on his set piece, right? His set play is to take out Gondor, and when he takes out Gondor, then the entirety of Middle Earth opens up to him. Because there's also hints of things happening further in the east that are talked about and all that sort of stuff. So he's got all these different things in action. But as Denethor says, Gondor has the pride of being that thorn in his side, and so he wants to wipe that out, because wiping that out gives the message to the rest of the world: fall in line.
Yep.
So focused on Gondor, he misplaced 10,000 Rohirrim. That's a rough one to swallow. It's
still better than just forgetting about the Iron Fleet.
Dan and Dave.
Yeah. The other thing too that I really wanted to stress this with this chapter, just like what I was stressing with earlier, is we've been introduced in these 5 chapters into a world that is so much larger than just Rohan and Gondor. You've got these wild men here in this chapter that are so very clearly different than the people that of the land they exist in, and speaking even in different languages. And so you kind of get the idea of kind of like the Welsh and the British and the Scots all on the Isle there. And there's just this whole large set of differing cultures in there that are still working together, but it's all this larger world that these wild men, they're not going to participate in the war. They're not going to go and fight, but they recognize that they can still help in the situation. But they're like, you guys go and do your thing. We'll guide you through this, but that's as far as it go. And for doing that, then you get to leave us alone.
Yeah. Let Aragorn know that we did this so that when he's king, he won't come chop down all our forests. That if you do that, that'd be great. That's the Woses. Well, I didn't know this. I originally thought this was Tolkien making fun of the French, because I thought Woses was like a kind of French pronunciation. But no, apparently it's just actual, like, a legitimately Rohirrim word. I was kind of bummed to discover that.
Fair. All right. Saved final thoughts here. Otherwise, I think we just lead into what we'll cover next time.
My
All right.
final thought.
Okay.
I've only got one. I kind of like it that Merry and Pippin are our main characters in this one. So it's largely told from their point of view. So it's kind of in keeping how we saw with the previous stuff, how it was really Sam kind of became the headspace character. And now we've got Merry and Pippin separated, but each kind of taking the protagonist spot in the narrative. So like that upon reflection.
Yeah, that's a good call, and they both are outside of Pippin's time with Baragon's son. Really, kind of was reflective, like Mary was the whole time, on just how lonely they were in separation from each other. But there's just kind of like that. I think that perspective in general, when you're heading off into war, you have this own time in your own headspace, and you got to wrestle with all of those things. And I think that it picks up that loneliness of war.
But it also helps, like, we know where the story's going. I know this is no spoilers, but it really helps establish the ending, I think, which is cut from the film. So that's a part that we're definitely going to enjoy. But the fact that we are able to occupy the headspace of Frodo and Sam, and now really get some additional chapters with Merry and Pippin, I think it serves the story quite well towards the true ending of the series, of the book.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So the first half of the third book is poised on the edge of a knife, right? And when you go to the next chapter, which we won't go into because it's the next chapter, but it just jumps right in. Right. And so we're hitting speed with these chapters now. And it's very finely poised, and I just want to turn the page and read. Right.
Yeah, Pips, this was a brutal stopping point, man.
Yeah.
See, this was done with intention, though, because I'm going to say, much less eloquently, what Gadfly was saying. Tune in next time for the White Cloaks covering the epic conclusion of Book 5 of The Return of the King. Same bat time, same bat channel. And our guest next time is going to be Lady Balefire. She's apparently gonna dress up. She's gonna cosplay or something like that. So that'll be interesting. I have no idea what character she's gonna dress up as. I'm assuming that it's gonna be Eowyn. I guess we'll find out.
As long as it's
so you'll
not
have to come back
Dernhelm.
next time. Yeah, exactly. She can't be Dernhelm.
Peace out, everyone.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. We're going to end it there, and as always, the chat, awesome. Really appreciated your guys' input. We went down some side roads on some stuff there, but I think that it was all pretty productive. And I think we had 10, 11 people here on the stream, watching the stream at a time. So pretty good for one of these streams. So thank you guys. Hope that you're enjoying these discussions. Hope that you're reading along with us. And I guess we will see you guys next time.